but it's because we have a fiscally inept government. We got to do something about that. Let's bring our guest in, our senior Ottawa columnist, David Krayden. He loves talking about the incompetence of Ottawa and offering some positive solutions as well. How's it going, David?
Good day.
So, I appreciate you coming on. I mean, you've really been writing a lot of stuff lately, and it's been popular, and you're just hitting the nail on the head when it needs to be. Maybe I'll just kind of run through some of your columns. The one you just put out today, you're talking about Trudeau finding his political soulmate out in California.
Yeah, I usually refer to Joe Biden as his political mentor and soulmate, but I found it fascinating. He got together with Gavin Newsom during the Summit of the Americas, and those two are really birds of a feather. Newsom, of course, went through a recall recently, and it was a miracle of sorts that he managed to survive. One of the most incompetent governors in the State of the Union. And he, as I joke in the column, it must have been the patron saint of incompetent politicians that got him through, because he had no right to win that recall. And he had a very good Republican opponent running against him who really should have won. But of course, the two of them got together and hugged and just had a real love fest together. And they signed something called a framework. And and it's not clear to me after reading 5 or 6 news reports what exactly it is. It's got something to do with reducing the threat of climate change, which, of course, what in heck is this? I don't know, but Trudeau will no doubt come home like Neville Chamberlain, waving this piece of paper saying, and we've arrested climate change in our time. And it's just more nonsense, because I found it interesting, of course, that BC and California are both paying the same amount for gas. California just hit $10 a gallon, and BC is paying the equivalent of that, which is $2.20 a liter. How do I know that? Because I remember my dad telling me when we went from gallon to liter, when it was 22 cents a liter, that was $1 a gallon. So times that by 10, $2.20 a liter is $10 a gallon. So we now have the honor of paying the same amount that California is paying for gas. Yeah, it's a little bit different because the imperial gallon's different than the American gallon, but what the heck? It's almost the same. And we're going to be paying much more here soon, because the carbon tax will assure us of that. But it's just fascinating to me that these guys are not living in the real world. I mean, inflation is going up. Gas prices are going up. Both of our countries are headed for a recession. And all these guys can talk about is the threat of climate change. Like this is a real existential threat to most people. And most people can't even afford to buy groceries anymore. And it just astounds me. Here they are jet setting around the world. Justin gets into his Challenger, increases his carbon footprint, like this is his right to do so. And he can do this because he's bringing the message to the people. And he lands in Colorado Springs, has the tour of NARAD, goes down to Los Angeles, meets with his buddies, and it's just unreal. But, here I go again.
Well, and California really should be, as you said, for anybody else visiting, looking at it, properly, they're going to see that as an example of what not to do right now. I was down in Arizona last January, and you'd pop just into the California border down there, and suddenly gas, even then, would go up $3 a gallon the second you cross the border. Yet there's not a single oil pump in Arizona, but California's got Bakersfield and oil all the way down to Los Angeles. It's bad policy. It's pressuring them, not a lack of resources. And we're seeing businesses relocating into Texas and other jurisdictions because Newsom's incompetent policy is pushing them out of there. And yeah, to see Trudeau seeing this guy as inspirational, that's kind of distressing.
Well, California is actually having, for the first time in its history, California was always they call it the Golden State. People used to flock to California from all over America because it was the promised land. You could go there and you could start a new life, even if you were picking oranges or apples, for God's sake. Or you could go there to start in the movie business, and you could do anything in California. Now everybody's leaving California. Businesses are leaving. People are leaving because it's too expensive to live there. not just the price of gas, the taxation has gone through the roof. Businesses are leaving, and people are leaving. Even liberals are leaving because it's too dangerous to live in California. Carjackings are up. Homicides are going through the roof, like 200% increase in homicides in some cities. It's incredible. Even places like San Diego that used to be conservative strongholds, and they used to be relatively safe places to live, are just absolutely incredible now. And if you haven't seen San Francisco lately, I used to love San Francisco. It's an absolutely incredibly out of whack now. And it's just unbelievable what's happened to that state. And thanks in large to governors like Gavin Newsom and other people, and mayors like they've got in San Francisco and Los Angeles, and the DAs, of course, who are not enforcing the laws.
Yeah, no, that's everywhere. And yeah, Calgary, we've got an $87 billion climate plan that our mayor is embracing. We're well on our road to San Francisco out here. Meanwhile, nobody can ride public transit because the crime has driven everybody off of it. The parallels are very troublesome.
Yes.
We should be learning from them, not emulating them. But that doesn't seem the case. Speaking of DAs, that's another piece you wrote about the recall of a liberal DA and how that could be a sort of bad news for Justin Trudeau in a sort of distant way.
Yeah, I found it fascinating that the Democratic Party in the United States is essentially in a civil war. And San Francisco, as I said, is a city aflame because it has become a city that is just literally at war with itself. And if you look at the electorate there, it's probably about 80% Democratic. Easily over the years, it's become firmly entrenched in the Democratic camp. So you're really looking at a one-party state. But that one-party city, if you will, has become completely divided. And it represents basically how the Democratic Party writ large in the United States is increasingly divided against itself, and how Joe Biden really has betrayed some of his core constituencies. And it's become a party of these super elites who are completely out of touch with basic people, blue-collar workers, and people with basic values, and who don't want to see people strung out on the sidewalk on drugs, who don't want to see people urinate and defecate on the subways and not be charged, who don't want to walk down the street and be attacked and brutalized and have their money stolen, and shopkeepers who don't think people should just walk into their store and have shoplifters walk out with their goods and not be prosecuted. Those used to be basic Democratic Party values too, that shouldn't be allowed. But the far left has taken over the party so much that those are suddenly not pertinent values to the Democratic Party. And San Francisco is fighting back, and they're saying, first of all, they booted out their school board because the school board said they're going to take Abraham Lincoln's name off of a school because they said Abraham Lincoln was a white supremacist racist and he has no right to be on the school. And people said, "That's just a minute. That's going too far." So they got rid of the school board. And now they said this DA, this Chesia Bodwin, is not prosecuting anybody. He's rewritten the penal code. He's fired all the prosecutors, and he seems to be not on the side of the prosecution, but he's on the side of the defense. He's on the side of the criminals. So who's on our side? So he was defeated massively, like 61% of the voters in San Francisco, liberal voters, said, get rid of him. And this does not bode well for Joe Biden. He's lost his core constituency. And this is exactly what's happening to Justin Trudeau in this country. He's losing his core constituencies. He's losing immigrant votes. He's losing blue-collar votes. And what is he left with? All he's left with is a lot of cranky environmentalists. And a lot of elites who really don't add up to a lot of votes anymore. I think he's in for a shock. If he's still around for the next election, I think he's in for a great shock because there's very little left to the Liberal Party. The NDP Liberal Alliance is shedding votes and voters in a big way right now. And they're largely going to a more populist conservative party. If that conservative party elects a leader that reflects those populist values, and I think that's got to be Pierre Poilievre or Leslie Lewis. It cannot be a Patrick Brown or a Jean Charest. It cannot be an establishment candidate like that. If in fact that happens, it's going to be the rebirth of the People's Party of Canada, if that happens, because the golden opportunity for the Conservative Party is to pick up the voters who are fed up with the elitist New Democratic Party and the elitist Liberal Party. That's exactly what it's become right now. They do not reflect real Canadian people anymore. They reflect the values, the perverted values of elite people who are out of touch with people who have to buy groceries in the grocery store, who have to go and buy their gas, and who really have to save their money to buy a house.
Yeah, well, in the United States, I mean, we pay attention to them, and we have to, because they're sort of a bellwether of what will happen in Canada. What we see in progressive cities in the United States today is what we're going to see here in 2 to 3 years, or maybe less afterwards. And as you said, I mean, the main thing is reality is coming home to roost. We can afford wishy-washy policies for environmental things and drug, facilities and things like that until you can't make the rent, and until crime is starting to actually make you fearful for yourself, or scared for your kids to go to school, or for you to get to work. Then suddenly the ideals go to the wayside, and those more important issues come to the forefront for voters. And yeah, the Liberals might be not realizing what they're missing there.
Well, I think I wrote recently about, decriminalizing, some hard drugs in BC, and the rationale being that this is somehow going to cause fewer overdoses. And it just baffles my mind, because BC for the last 20 years has been on this course of trying to do harm reduction and reducing overdoses. And every year the rate of overdose has gone up, and they don't seem to get it. The easier you make it to access drugs, hard drugs like heroin and methamphetamines and cocaine, drugs that are that are lethal and that are easy to kill, the easier it is to overdose on them. And somehow the BC government never gets this. And they think that if they make more in-site injection sites, that this is somehow going to reduce the amount of overdoses. And of course, it just keeps going up. And why they refuse to bend on this, because it's ideology, because the ideology says it's supposed to work, but the reality demonstrates it doesn't work. Year in, year out, they refuse to bend because their ideology says it shouldn't be that way. And it's killing people, literally, every year, more and more. So that's a tragedy. It's a complete tragedy in this country, but the left is completely unbending. And this is something I noted the other day when I was speaking to somebody, is that the left used to be somewhat pragmatic. When something didn't work, they would tend to be somewhat pragmatic in saying, let's try another solution, because this is simply not working. Today, the left is unbending in terms of seeking an ideological solution and sticking with that ideological solution come what may. And I find this extremely disturbing. And it doesn't matter how many people suffer, how many people die, and how much the economy is in the bag. They will continue to push through ideological solutions that do not work, just because they think they should be working. And we see this not just with harm reduction and drug strategies that are literally lethal, but with economic strategies that simply do not work. And what we see from Justin Trudeau, when things do not work, he distracts. So he talks about abortion when it's not even an issue in this country. He's got what he wants in terms of abortion. He shouldn't even be talking about it. We have no abortion law in this country. He talks about handgun freeze when it's virtually impossible in this country to own a handgun. Try it. I'm an ex-military person. I used to have a 9mm Browning, but it's virtually impossible for me to own a handgun. But yet Justin Trudeau distracts constantly on other issues instead of addressing the issues that really matter to people. He won't talk about inflation. He won't talk about gas prices. He won't even consider reducing or eliminating the carbon tax because that's ideology. Because somehow that's going to stop climate change, even though that's utterly ridiculous. It's not affecting climate change at all.
No, and we've seen the examples. I mean, BC's had a carbon tax for a long time, and they have not reduced emissions one bit due to it. So, I mean, you know, set aside the premise that it's going to do anything about it, but as you said, it's ideological. So you can't ration or reason with a person when they're blinded by that, whether it's right or left. Actually, it's a dangerous place to be.
It is a dangerous place to be because at some point you have to say whether or not I believe in this. I have to understand that people are being adversely affected. And if you're a politician, you're there to serve the people. And this seems to be the first thing politicians forget. And unfortunately, it's the first thing Justin Trudeau forgot on day one upon becoming an elected politician. He forgot he's there to serve the people. He really believes the people are there to serve him. I've never seen a politician with more sense of entitlement. And every time he opens his big mouth, that's all you get from him. He lectures, he hectors, he tells people what to do. He will never be receptive to advice. He never listens to a crowd. He never answers a question. He never wants to hear any advice from anybody. All he does is give advice and tell people what they should be doing, and he dispenses what he thinks people should do. And Justin Trudeau is basically the model of a modern politician in terms of them having no respect for what the people really want.
Well, we just got to keep hammering on him and hope that the electorate wakes up and finally moves him along. So I appreciate your very many columns, you know, holding them to account and bringing these things up, just like, June Marie, our commenter, saying, I like David. I wish there were more journalists like him. Well, he's out there, and make sure you get onto the Western Standard online or westernstandard.news now and catch those columns as they come out. You're also pretty prolific on Twitter, right? Like, I'm just looking for ways people can find your stuff.
Yeah, I put everything up, Western Standard on Twitter, and I'm also encouraging people to get a subscription to Western Standard online and do it, because it's what we need to do, of course, is to support independent media, because as we say all the time, as I say all the time, the mainstream media, not only in the United States, but in Canada especially, is bought off. And the Trudeau government has bought off most of the media in Canada. And the Western Standard refuses to accept 1 penny of government money. And that's one reason that I'm working here, because it's independent and I can say what I want without the Trudeau government coming down on me. I'm proud to say that.
And we appreciate it, and the listeners really do. There's some great comments. People are they're complimenting your dressing as well. They're sick of looking at me and my mistied ties and everything. All right. Well, thanks for coming on to talk to us today, David. And I look forward to more of your columns as they continue to come out.
Always a pleasure, Corey.
Thanks. So that is our Ottawa senior columnist, David Krayden. And as you heard, yes, he's got a lot to say in writing and on these shows. I see somebody else saying he needs his own show. Well, if we could coax him into it, I'd be all for it. Hey, the more voices, the better as we get digital and things like that. But be sure, again, to catch that. He's always writing on the westernstandard.news. And as he said, yes, he's doing it because he's a veteran journalist. He's been around a number of years, but we're offering an alternative where you are not beholden to the government. And, that's a point of principle that's important to a lot of us who just want to get stuff out and be able to say what we feel, whether we're right or wrong. It's just as long as it's open discourse.